Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about just a little bit about what the project Darwin Now is with the British Council. And then I want to reflect on some of the key challenges surrounding communicating evolution. And the obvious one here is the science-religion debate, which has certainly gained a lot of interest this year. As part of this, I wanted to run through some of the data that we collected as part of an international poll that we took on attitudes towards Darwin and evolutionary theory. And then I'd just like to reflect on some of the results, and some of the results of some of the events that we've had this year. So hopefully some pointers for where next for Darwin. So I'm going to skip that slide. Okay, just to give you a quick idea of what the project is. The British Council is in a rather unique position to deliver a science communication project on Darwin because we have offices in 109 countries worldwide. So we have an entire infrastructure of networks that we can use there with partnerships, which means that we can work in a way that no other organisation really can. So this project is running from June 2008 till June 2010, but due to popular demand, it will be carrying on actually beyond 2011. And it actually currently is planned to run in 50 countries worldwide in most geographical regions. We haven't got the Arctic yet, but we're working on it. Now, the project is for a number of different audiences. So we have public audiences, and these include various outreach activities like lectures, events at science festivals, seminars, café scientifiques, and we have an international exhibition as well. We also have a number of academic and policy-facing activities. So we've had run various research grant schemes this year in sciences, arts and humanities. We've funded international meetings and networks, and we've run our own symposia and conferences this year. Another facet of the project is promoting a number of educational materials which can also be used as part of workshops, schools, events and museum-based activities. And all of these education materials are freely available through the internet in a number of languages. Supporting this, which may be of interest to some of our media colleagues that are here today, we have a number of web-based activities, including web broadcasts, and we've had a number of media activities, and these have included debates at the World Conference of Science Journalists, which we were one of the sponsors of, and running bursary schemes for journalists to attend conferences relating to evolution. And we've also worked with the BBC quite closely this year, producing content for their radio science output, both on Radio 4 and on the World Service, and we organised a television debate with the BBC Arabic team as well. Okay, so why is the British Council doing Darwin Now? Well, obviously Darwin's work is quite central to the way that we understand not only modern evolutionary biology, but a number of the rather kind of hard-hitting questions that we're going to have to face in the 21st century. So issues such as loss of biodiversity, how we deal with certain biomedical advances, food security, I mean the list goes on. Evolutionary theory cuts right to the heart of our understanding of our place in nature and society as well. So there is this not only the technological and applied science side of the importance of evolutionary theory, but also the cultural context as well. Darwinism, as I'm sure you are more than aware, whether rightly or wrongly, is often seen to be a very controversial subject. And its communication has an interesting history in its own right. The main key issue, I would say, with communicating Darwinism within the context of the science-religion debate is it's often seen to have an atheist agenda, and this can be quite problematic. Therefore, it's at the nexus of debates involving the role not only of science in society and the relationship between science and religion, but by extension, debates about faith and reason. Okay, I'll skip through this just to highlight that one of the most successful events we've had this year is actually an international conference at the Bibliotheca Alexandrina in Egypt, where we had 140 speakers from over 30 countries worldwide. And we also had a number of activities for over 500 Egyptian undergraduate and postgraduate students. And this, actually, in terms of the media, we were incredibly pleased to discover that our available audience figures for the conference to date were in the region of around 350 million, and all the stories were positive. There was not one negative story about evolution, which was fantastic. Okay, one of the other things that we have is an international exhibition. which will be used in all 50 countries simultaneously. And there is a version here in the Bloomfield Museum. If you want to go and see that, I would encourage you to do so. It's a fantastic museum. I visited it yesterday for the first time. One of my favourite places that this exhibition is being used is it's being toured around shopping malls in India, which is fantastic because it's a completely different audience. Imagine going to pick up your groceries or your clothes and stumbling across a fantastic exhibition about Darwin. It's certainly received some interesting comments. The countries we're working in are quite broad-ranging. I think one of the important things to point out here is that we have a UK-based team running the project. We didn't select these countries. These countries were self-selecting based on partnership interest or audience demand. So I think that one of the things that I would have commented on perhaps more is that there are some very interesting countries in there in terms of the audiences that have self-selected for communicating evolution. There are, of course, some very significant issues to consider when communicating what can sometimes be seen as a rather controversial idea across so many different cultural contexts. And the debate that is repeated again and again and again in most of these countries is the science-religion debate. Unfortunately, there is a common conception that evolutionary science necessarily challenges religious or faith perspectives. There is this conflict thesis that seems to have taken a grip, certainly within the media, and to some extent within the public domain, though I would challenge that. And I'll show you why I think that's the case later. This conflict thesis, with my historian's hat on and with my philosopher's hat on, I would say it's quite an erroneous one. It's a mistaken conflict thesis because historically, evolution was actually quite broadly accepted by people of faith and those of taking rather strong religious stances. And also from a philosophical perspective, you can't disprove God with science. I'd like to see you try, but the budget would be even bigger than the Hadron Collider at CERN, and I think it might bankrupt the world. So there are some issues that I'd like to flag up before I look at some of our polling data. And these actually come from Eugenie Scott, who some of you may have heard of. She works at the National Centre for Science Education in the US, and she is one of the most well-known faces in terms of communicating evolution, but also trying to tackle the propagation of creationist ideas. Now, Eugenie argues that there are three pillars to the promotion of creationism. The first is that Darwinism is a theory in crisis. The second, which is the one that I'll focus on today, is that evolutionary science and religion are completely incompatible. So creationists would argue you either have to believe in God or think that evolution happens. And this is a very divisive tactic, obviously. The third, which we have also been working on, is that it's only fair to teach alternative theories like creationism and intelligent designs within the school system, and this is becoming more of a problem outside of the US as well. As I said, I'm mainly going to focus on the second one today. So just to give you a bit of a background on the ethos behind the Darwin Now project, I think it's fair to say, and I would hope I'm speaking to people who would agree on this here. There's a very big difference between wanting to tackle the rise of creationism and intelligent design, which are at their heart political and anti-scientific movements. There's a very big difference between that and taking an intentionally anti-religious stance when communicating evolutionary science, which is, after all, an empirical theory. It is a scientific theory, and this doesn't have to be counter to people's personal faith or religious stances. So Darwin Now explores the relationship between evolution and religion in an unprejudiced and an open way. It's seeking to create a neutral space for people to gain access to the core content of evolutionary theory. And it's called Darwin Now because we're not just looking at the historical evidence and Darwin the man, we've brought it right up to date. We wanted to look at some of the more exciting cutting-edge areas of scientific research going on in the evolutionary sciences today. I think this dynamism is really important to communicate that there's lots of questions out there to be answered and that we really do need the next generation of biologists to come and work in biology. So we wanted to create this neutral space that not only discusses the historical context and the evidence, it also discusses the relationship of faith to evolutionary sciences and looks at the way that evolutionary sciences diverged from Darwin's day. This is quite important because it's showing science as a historical and philosophical process. So it's showing the methodology of science rather than just giving the endpoint evidence. As part of the delivery and development of the Darwin Now project, I'll skip through those ones and we'll go straight onto this one. We undertook a poll with Ipsos Mori in 10 countries around the world. UK, US, Mexico, Argentina, Spain, China, Russia, India, Egypt and South Africa. The poll was taken throughout April and May this year and was conducted in most countries as a face-to-face poll and via the telephone in Mexico, Argentina, China and the US, given the size of those countries. Today I'll just focus on the results from 3 of the questions. I may drop the 3rd one if we run out of time. And particularly I'd like to explore the public perception of the idea that there is a polarised conflict between evolutionary science on one end and religion or faith on the other. Okay, so this question, the first one we're going to look at, is really looking at what people's own perspectives are on how life has evolved or whether or not it has evolved. There's quite an important distinction here to make, and whilst obviously this kind of poll can only ever be indicative because of the nature of the way that these polls are undertaken, we did take very good care to make sure that we didn't only give an atheist option for accepting evolution. So we had to make sure that there was a theistic option. So broadly speaking, we'll be thinking of life on Earth, including human life, was created by God and has always existed in its current form. Oh, I just switched it off. That doesn't help, does it? This one I'll refer to as the creationist option. This one here is the atheistic option. So God plays no part in the development of human life. And the human life part, I think, here is quite important. This one here is a process guided by God. This is really, we wanted to try and capture those that hold a theistic evolution stance, those that are comfortable with both their faith and religious position and believe, will think that evolution happens over a geological period of time, perhaps with a God as the first spark. And this one, obviously, is the get out clause one, which I would say a number of people of both faith and both strong scientists probably took because it's quite difficult. These aren't very fine-grained responses. Okay, just to skip through some of the interesting results. China, obviously, there is a majority there that think that life on Earth has evolved over time as a result of natural selection alone. Now, this obviously, in some ways, will reflect the political and religious stance in China. In all other countries, fewer than half think natural selection without a role for a deity is responsible for all life forms. However, it's important to note that in most countries, over half believe in some form of evolution, either through natural selection or a process guided by God. The lowest level of those that uphold a broadly atheistic version of evolution by means of natural selection are evident in Egypt with just 2%, South Africa with 6%, the US with 13% and India with 20%. Indeed, in South Africa, only a quarter believe in some form of evolution. The most popular view is that life was created by God and has always existed in its current form. So that's 43% overall. Interestingly, in the plus 65 population group, it actually goes up to 59%. There is one interesting set of figures here to pull out, I would say, in relation to Egypt. So in Egypt, the most popular view is that life evolved over time in a process guided by God. So that's 50% overall. And this is actually 56% when you look at just the 18 to 24 age group. Though a large minority believe that life was created by God and has always existed in its current form. In total, therefore, 83% believe God has been responsible for the development of life on Earth. However, there's a very interesting contrast here with other religious perspectives elsewhere. So while in Egypt the most popular view is that all species, including humans, have evolved over time, though in a process that involves a deity, in South Africa, the US and India, the majority believe that a creationist stance. So this really supports some of the research that's coming out that suggests that in countries like Egypt, there is more of an issue with macroevolution than microevolution. So rather than thinking that each individual species is created as one, there's a potential acceptance of most species having evolved within species groups rather than having evolved from the very outset. It's very, very different from the kind of young earth creationism that we are seeing currently in the US. So there's a very different stance. One of the other issues that isn't quite as prevalent in terms of looking at creationism outside of the US is young earth creationism in terms of geological time. Geological time doesn't pose such a problem. Okay, so 5 minutes, okay. There are clearly a broad range of perspectives here, and the results suggest that views don't simply fall into very discrete polar opposites. There's a lot of middle ground. Now, one of the things we wanted to find out is, irregardless of people's perspectives, do the public think that there is a necessary conflict between evolutionary science and religion? Do they think that other people have a problem with evolutionary science and religion? And the results are actually quite surprising. So, as you can see straight away, the most encouraging result is that in all the countries polled, more people agree than disagree that it's possible to believe in God and accept evolution through natural selection. And this is a really important difference in this question, is that we've asked here specifically that all life, including human life, evolved over time as a result of natural selection. So in every single country polled, that's the majority perspective, that those views are compatible. Again, there are some interesting points to pick out. So in Egypt, people's views are more polarised than elsewhere. And views are fairly divided in China, quite interestingly. Views in other countries are less polarised, though in the US there's a significant minority who feel both beliefs cannot be held at the same time. There's also an interesting flip when you look at people's personal opinions about evolution here. So the opinion that there's a clash between science and religion is most likely to be taken by creationists in the US and in Egypt, South Africa and Russia. However, when you look at the results in the UK, Argentina, Spain and China, it's most likely to be those who hold an atheistic version of evolution that thinks that there's a clash. So the key take-home message here really is that in the 10 countries polled, the majority of people felt that it was possible to believe in a God and think that evolution occurs through a process of natural selection. Now, this is quite worrying because one of the things that, I mean, it's quite positive, but it's also quite worrying in terms of the way that we communicate evolutionary science, especially when we think about media representation. We quite often find that people are saying you should have equal time for creationists and evolutionary theorists when you have television debates or radio debates or in articles, and this is quite common in the US, for example. But this doesn't actually reflect the public perception. The public perception is much more nuanced, and it's much more nuanced when you look at the results for education as well, which unfortunately I don't have time to go through. Now, as part of this poll and as part of the results coming out of the conferences and symposiums that we've run this year, there are a few things that I would really like to recommend when we think about the future of communicating Darwinism and evolutionary theory, especially within the international context. And we need to have a much more integrated approach, and this needs to go for whether we are reporting things in the media, whether we're working in a science museum, whether we're giving a public lecture, or whether we're indeed teaching evolution in the classroom. There needs to be a much stronger role for explaining and demarcating how science works and what science actually is. I think this would deal with some of the issues of mixed reporting. So when there's changing data coming through, and this can sometimes be confusing, and it can sometimes lead to a lack of trust in the public towards scientists. The general movement within the UK in terms of science communication is looking towards this idea of communicating science as a process, communicating scientific methodology, and also teaching more history and philosophy of science to students both in the school system and the university system. And this can be reflected in media reporting. I know that it sounds like quite a difficult thing to do, but I'll just leave you with one link which I would entreat you to go and look at. This is a debate that we organised with the BBC World Service, and this was actually recorded at the conference at the Biblioteca Alexandrina. It's an hour-long debate with people, academics from all around the world, talking about evolution religion, faith, education, but there's no creationist on the platform, and it's quite a bold step for the BBC to take, because other media organisations and outlets have suggested that they wouldn't want to do that because there's not enough grit, and it actually was quite successful. We've been working very closely with the BBC radio unit in London, and one of the things that they're now developing is a series of programmes that are specifically looking at the philosophy of science within their programming to tackle some of these confusions about how science works. So hopefully the take-home message from the Darwin year is that we have a more sophisticated and integrated approach to not only teaching evolution, but communicating evolution through these kind of activities, but also through the media as well. Thank you.